Oh, it looks like we're live on Facebook.
Hey. Okay.
Kelly, whose page is it on so I can?
It is on mine, and I will share it.
Okay.
You want me to share it to your personal?
Sure.
Oh, no.
I'm not seeing it yet.
Yeah, I don't see it.
Hold on, it's not public. I got to make it public, which I just did.
That's okay, because
There we go.
we're not officially started, so.
There we are. Okay, I'm going to post it in the group too.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see that it's going to let me even share it with other people, so you have to share it. So share it on your page. I'm losing my voice, of course.
Shoot.
Oh.
Why am I not seeing it?
It's on my personal page.
Yeah, I was on your personal page.
Oh, it's there.
Is it? Okay. Well, shall we get started? I know James has to be gone by 7:30, so that'll keep us honest with our time.
Definitely. So I'm going to do my best to do all this multitasking, but I want to first thank our guests this evening. We're excited to have James Knight and Kelly Charles Collins with us. I am Dr. Cultural Daugherty. I'm the CEO and owner of Transitions Educational Consulting. I had 18 years of experience in the classroom and have been consulting going into my second year now, focusing on teacher advocacy and leadership. Tanya and I met about maybe 8 or 9 months ago and happened to get into this discussion about race and race relations and decided, you know, we could have an impact on our communities. What can we do? And so we decided to create this panel. So I'm excited to be working with Tanya. This is our second series. So that is who I am. I'm going to hand it over to Tanya to introduce herself, and then we're going to talk about a few expectations for our discussion.
All right. Seth, are you able to post the biographies?
I don't think so.
No. Okay. All right. Oh. Okay. Well, everybody, thank you very much for coming tonight. Very excited for this discussion. This has been kind of a passion project of mine. And when I met Kelly, I first brought her to GradePower Learning, and we did kind of a live broadcast. And we talked about basically what it was like to be a mom of a African-American boy, and just, you know, how that can impact the family and one's life. And that's basically how this discussion got started. And so we decided that this was a conversation that needed to be further promoted, and just really looked at and had an honest discussion. And quite frankly, it's a difficult discussion. It's one that I'm not always comfortable asking questions. You know, I grew up in a very middle-class family. My mom and dad are on here tonight, and there they are waving. And, you know, so my personal experience is very different. And, you know, one of the things that I have learned is that my experiences are not everybody else's experiences. And being in education, you realize how important family and security and just that peace of mind that you need to be able to learn. And that to me is how all of this plays into education. So I am here to learn from our guests here tonight, and I really appreciate Kelly and James to be here and talk about their expertise in these fields. And so I will then pass it back to you, Kelly.
Sure. So for tonight's discussion, we want to make sure this is a very tough conversation. And sometimes it can make us uncomfortable. And so with the amount of people that are here, we want to just remember to respect each other, respect our guests, and respect each other, because we bring with us what we were raised with. We bring with us our own experiences, and they may be different. And that is why we're in this place, right? And so we want to have a really engaging conversation. We're going to ask our participants to leave your comments either on Facebook Live or leave your comments and questions in the chat on Zoom. And then we will address your questions to the panelists for them to respond. Also, we will be recording this as I push record right now. The host will push record so that other educators and business owners can come back to this discussion and engage with us in that way. So it's a very important conversation. I am going to introduce our first guest, Kelly Charles Collins. She is an attorney, author, speaker, and unconscious bias expert whose mission is to empower smart organizations to stay on the right side of the next hashtag movement. She has the unique ability of making complicated, difficult, and sensitive topics approachable. As the CEO of HR Legally Speaking LLC, she leverages her legal expertise, intuitive perspective, and warm personality to help people understand how our unconscious minds affect our decision-making in work and life. She's sought after around the country because of her expertise in helping organizations and individuals realize how unconscious bias and indifference can stifle opportunity, prevent people from reaching their full potential, and cause harmful professional, personal, and legal issues. She shares her expertise on disrupting unconscious bias, bystander intervention, conducting workplace investigations and courageous conversations through training, consulting, and keynote speaking engagements. If that's not enough, she's also an author of 3 books, Ace Your Workplace Investigations, which helps HR leaders conduct legally compliant investigations, Speak, Silence is Not an Option, which empowers individuals to move from being bystanders to advocates, and Conversations Change Things, the perfect framework for courageous conversations. Her award-winning TEDx talk entitled The Bystander Effect, Why Some People Act and Others Don't, has been featured on television and podcasts and has been quoted in several publications. Finally, she is the founder of Ladies Who Leverage, a global women's community for entrepreneurs and professionals. She assures us that she is not all business, although it definitely sounds like it. She enjoys in her spare time dancing, singing, spending time on the beach with her family, and especially inspiring women to stand unapologetically in their greatness. So Kelly, I thought that all of that was so important. I couldn't delete any of it. So if you want to learn more about Kelly, trust me, there is much more. She is an amazing person, and we are so happy to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Kelly.
Mm-hmm. You're muted. Let's see. Seth has to unmute you. There we go.
There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Oh, technology always makes it interesting. No matter how much you think you're prepared, never prepared enough.
Right.
That was an amazing, that was an amazing biography. I have a long way to go to accomplish a quarter of what Kelly Charles Collins has done. Oh my goodness. Seth, if you could bring up James Knight's biography. Just to quickly kind of give my own introduction for James. I was here at GradePower Learning and was talking to one of our students here about our first diversity discussion. And that student happens to attend St. Ed's, and he said, "Oh, you should invite our diversity teacher. He's really cool." And I said, "Okay, I will." And so I sent an invitation to James, and he accepted. And we met for coffee, and I could have sat there and talked to him forever because it was just such an amazing conversation. And I was lucky enough to then get him booked into Rotary, which he gave an amazing presentation last Thursday at Cleveland Rotary Club. And so with that, I'll read quickly James Knight's bio. James Knight is a doctoral candidate with extensive research in cultural humility and who specializes in cultural sensitivity trainings, has developed an innovative approach to building equity and belonging rooted in cultural humility. As Vice President for Equity and Inclusion at St. Edward's High School, James leads the development of vision and strategies that champions the importance of value of a diverse and inclusive community. Part of his work involves engaging faculty, staff, students, and parents in order to make the school a culturally safe environment. And in this role, James assesses the potential barriers to inclusion and diversity, develops strategies focused on recruiting and retaining a diverse community. Annually, he designs training programs on cultural competency, cultural humility, cultural safety, and a wide range of topics designed to increase awareness and support of diversity and equity. In addition to his work at St. Ed's, James Knight works with a variety of organizations, teams, and leaders across the country as a diversity and inclusion strategist. Much of his work is centered on assisting organizations and leaders in developing a cultural humility framework in order to create a culturally safe environments. He's done workshops such as Cultural Humility, the Great Mitigator. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. It is a posture of the heart and shows up in how you will live, lead, and listen. Humble leaders recognize the value in others. They inspire, connect, check in, and elevate those they serve and lead. And today we're going to discuss some of the tenets of cultural humility and its effectiveness. Please feel free, audience, to contact Mr. James Knight at jknight@seh.net or call or text him. Again, the discussion that he had at Rotary was just phenomenal. And I even got somebody thanking me profusely, telling me that his discussion literally changed her life.
Oh, wow.
So with that, we are excited to have our panelists. And Kelly, I'm going to give it back to you to get this conversation going.
All right, well, I think just to get started, I think let's get an understanding of racism and unconscious bias. What is the difference and why is it important for us to know the difference? Kelly.
So unconscious bias are snap judgments that we make about people, and it's unintentional, right? It's outside of our awareness. That's why it's called unconscious.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to just do with race and gender. So that makes it different from racism. That's one aspect of it. Unconscious bias has to do with everything that makes us unique and different. So whether it's our hair, whether I wear earrings or don't wear earrings, I'm left-handed or right-handed, I'm, part of the LGBTQIA community, what religion I am. And so what happens is our brain makes very quick judgments so that we can categorize people. Our brains get about 11 million bits of information per second, but can only consciously process about 40 of those bits. So imagine that you have all of these 10 million other bits that have to go somewhere. And what I call it is our junk drawer, right? It goes in the back of our brain and is stored so that when we encounter situations where we have to act on instinct, right? Snap, then it triggers our brain and our brain will allow us to make those types of judgments. If you think about fight, flight, and freeze, that's your unconscious mind kicking in, right? So that's a short version of what unconscious bias is. And if you think about stereotypes that we have about people, that is a type of unconscious bias. Talking about racism has to do with race, right? And it's really around how Black people are treated or mistreated based on institutional, structural, the power structures. It's using the power structure. So different from discrimination, where it might be, I'm discriminated against you or someone's discriminating against you. It's using the power of structures and institutions and laws to really dehumanize, denigrate, or to hold back a group of people. And in this case, when we're talking about racism in this country, we're really talking about Black people.
Anything to add, James?
Nah, she pretty much
Right.
she did a great job of laying that out in detail.
So what are the implications that class and ethnicity might have on community and race relations? Either of you can address that.
I'll let you go, James.
So what are the implications of
That
class
and ethnicity might have on community and race relations?
So James, this kind of goes back to some of our discussion about some of Dr. Ruby Payne's insights about class and poverty and racism. So, if that helps you to
yeah, for sure. So when we I think oftentimes when we look at the question, right, I think whatever question we try to answer, we always have to try to answer it in light of context. And so I think a lot of times people, they disregard the history of the United States. And when you really look deep into the history and you just really begin to just see how much history is taught in school and how much of it just doesn't really tell the full story of how much racism has existed in America's past. Then when we try to talk about this issue of race and class, sometimes people don't have a proper context to put it in, because they think like, well, why don't you just work harder, or why don't you just do this? But they don't understand how all these systems are colliding and coming into play. With Dr. Ruby Payne, she has a lot of great articles about class and racism and poverty and structure and things like that. The way it intersects is this: because racism is real, although people may not think it is, racism, I like to use the equation is prejudice plus power, right? And prejudice is really when you're prejudging people, right? When you have these preconceived opinions about people that are not rooted in truth or fact. And so historically, whites have told a narrative to convince people, or the majority, that Blacks, and let's use the example, Blacks are lazy, they don't work hard, just using all these different things to justify their actions and so forth. And so when we talk about class, I think of class either from the social aspect or from the economic aspect. And so when we talk about racism and class, some people are in the class that they're in as a result of racism, right? And so, as Kelly mentioned, racism does exist on several levels. Racism exists on, as he talked about, on the structural level, institutional level. You also got racism that might be at the heart level, where it's internalized. Then you also have it from interpersonal, when you're dealing with people and how we might use our power to oppress people and so forth. And so if we just say, let's say lower class, poverty class, racism oftentimes can keep people in a lower class, economically and socially, where racism denies people access to moving up the ladder. And people may say, I'm not doing that consciously, although some people might, but because it's so baked in America's past, it's so baked in the infrastructure, people don't realize how everyone doesn't have the same opportunities, right? That there are people who do have unconscious biases, and these things do show up in who we hire. It shows up in who we decide to do business with. It shows up in the school system. It shows up in so many aspects of our society. And so when we begin to look at middle class, poor class, however you want to, distinguish it, um, Dr. Ruby Payne, what she talks about in her article, Understanding Poverty, that much of our society is operating off of middle class values, and every class has hidden rules in it. And so if you never been exposed to certain things, you show up to school, you show up into certain meetings, you don't know the rules, you don't know what's expected of you. And then you're looked at negatively because you don't know these things and they feel like you should know these things. So all these things are intersecting. And this is why it's so important for us to really engage in self-awareness.
Yes.
And that we really begin to like take ownership that we are all imperfect people. And so because we're all are imperfect, that there's some unlearning that everyone has to do. And so sometimes people get defensive as if they're perfect. No one is perfect, right? No one is Jesus, right? We all have things that we need to learn from each other. And so when we're trying to look at this issue of racism, discrimination, classism, whatever it might be, we're just doing this because we believe in the idea that everyone should have equal access. Everyone should have an opportunity to be able to work hard, to be able to live the life they want without them being discounted or devalued or dehumanized, as Kelly said, before they even get a chance to talk.
And I think it's important too, like as we see what's going on right now, to also realize that racism is baked into our present, right? It is very, very present in this country. It has always been present. It has now reared its ugly head so that we can really see what Black people have been talking about for years and years and years. Now it's not, oh, you're pulling the race card, which I don't know where that came from to begin with. But it's one of those things that now people have to face the fact, right? We keep hearing the question, this is not who we are. Is this who we are? This is who this country is, right? It was built on the backs of Black people, right? And it was built on racism. And so we have to face that. And we can't forget about it. We keep being told, oh, that was 400 years ago. No, it's now, right? It's present. Slavery happened, right? But the impact of slavery has continued to today. And so when we're talking about unconscious bias versus discrimination versus racism, we're talking about the spectrum from being unintentional, right? Unconscious bias, all the way to intentional, being discrimination and racism. However, it doesn't matter what the intent is because the impact of all the things are the same, whether they're unintentional or intentional, the impact is the same. If I punch you in your eye by accident or intentionally and you get a black eye, the impact is the same. You still have the black eye. And so we have to be very, very mindful of that. So when we're talking about unconscious bias, oftentimes people want to escape behind unconscious bias. Oh, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. But that's why it's so important for us to understand what it is, right? And how it impacts our daily lives and the decisions that we make every single day, whether it's in our personal life or in the workplace, because the impact on the receiver is the same and is very detrimental and it compounds over time.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I was telling some students here, I was just talking about racism, and one of the things I looked at the word racism, I said, think about race. Like race is at the center of this word racism. The point of a race is to be first. And if someone feels like if let's put it this way, if someone is used to being first and then things start changing and the competition starts changing, then people are going to do whatever they can to make sure that they stay first or that they stay on top. And I was dealing with Reconstruction with my class, right? And Reconstruction, during those 10 years, Blacks made so much progress. They got into elected offices. The Civil Rights Act was passed, giving Blacks the right to vote, and they used that right. They wanted land. They started doing things for themselves. And for white America, this was a new face of America that they didn't like, because for so many years they could tell a Black person, I need you to do this. And the law at that time was that Blacks couldn't talk back. They couldn't resist it. And so now they're saying Blacks doing the same things they're doing. And now it's like, wait a minute, our country is different. I don't like this. So this gives rise to the KKK, because you can't go out and just do this openly. So all of a sudden, people begin to form these secret societies to harass, to intimidate Black people so that they wouldn't fully participate as a citizen in this country. And then it created a backlash where conservatives begin to get in power and they begin to change the laws. They begin to change the rules to put Black people in a new form of slavery and to push them way back, which established the color line and Jim Crow laws. And so what we saw last week and what we've been seeing over the years, this is just a reaction. This is like the same devil, it's just a different face. Like people say it's not who we are. And as Kelly said, yes, this is who we are. You know, people don't like to think that this is who we are, but we prayerfully can move away from this and move to a more inclusive place. But what she's saying is so powerful, because it does have to start on the individual level. Then we have to begin to look at it from a community level. But we do have to understand that there are things that are baked in the infrastructure. And because we are swimming in the water and we're breathing this, that even as an African American, I still have to be conscious that I'm not perpetuating some of the same stereotypes against someone who looks like me, because I've been miseducated in this school system or in this environment.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings us to our next question. You know, so how are some of the stereotypes impeding our minority communities? You know, we see the rap music, you know, just the movies and things like that. How does that perpetuate these stereotypes, and what impact do we have, and how, as we as business owners, educators, how can we kind of get beyond those stereotypes?
Well, so first of all, we have to counter stereotype, right? Just because you see rap music and you hear them talking about whatever they're doing, whether, you know, somebody's drinking liquor or, you know, they, you know, shooting a gun or whatever. If we look at country music, right? In country music, they're tearing up cars, beating out your window, beating their wife. They're doing all those kinds of things, right? But we have decided that that's okay. We have decided as a society that that's not that bad, right? That doesn't make them a thug. That doesn't make them inhumane. That doesn't make them a stereotype. That's just country music, right? On the other hand, we have decided that the music that Black people make, that white people take on, right? Whether it's in movies or, you know, to use as any type of jingle, or right now they're on TikTok, right? The kids are on TikTok and everybody is using Black music. The thing is that we have stereotyped Black people to make Black people and their music and the way they speak, the way we speak, as something that's so negative until it is something that white people can profit from, right? And when it becomes profitable, then it becomes acceptable. It's no longer over here, now it's over here. And so the stereotypes that are being created, we have to check ourselves and try to understand, why is it that we're doing that? Which goes back to what James was saying about keeping us down, right? So the more that you can keep Black people down and say, oh, rap music is horrible, but country music that talks about the same types of things, just in a different twang, right? is okay. So we have to really check ourselves and understand, why is it that we're making that differentiation, and who does it benefit to have one be negative and the other be positive? And then why do we then wait until we can use it in a way to profit for it to become acceptable? So it's all the internal work that has to be done around stereotyping. Stereotyping is us being exposed to things and then creating categories around people or groups of people so that we can put you over here, right? So it's almost a lazy way of interacting with people, right? And so we're all smart enough. We have enough information. We have Google. Google's my BFF, right? We have Google to be able to go out and figure out what is, is this that we see that is put out on TV, right, as the quote unquote stereotype, is that true? If we look at just what happened in the past week, when Black people were, and white people and everybody were marching for Black Lives Matter, and they were protesting, and they were doing it safely, and they weren't creating a ruckus, right? And some people jumped in, probably some of the ones that were on here, they jumped in, right, and started tearing up stuff. Then everyone's like, oh, they're thugs, they're criminals. Oh my God, can't believe they're tearing down property. Black Lives Matter is horrible, right? Blue lives matter, all lives matter. Last week, we have them tearing up our government, tearing up the Capitol, and we don't have those same types of conversations around. I mean, it took everything for them to start calling them terrorists or domestic terrorists or whatever they're calling them right now. So you have to, I mean, it's so, if people just really look, you can see the distinctions, and we have to understand, why is that distinction being made? And it goes back to what James was saying. It's about the power, right? There's no way that Black people would have even made it to the steps of the Capitol, much less to have breached the Capitol in the way that they did. And if they had breached the Capitol, they certainly would not have been asked nicely or being helped down the stairs to get out. They would have been taken out in body bags. And so that is the problem, that we have to, like, what are the stereotypes that we have created around Blacks and Browns versus everybody else? And then we have to do self-reflection, right? So that we see that those are things that we've made up, and we've made them up in order to benefit us in some way.
Yeah, like something in critical race theory is this idea of counter stories, counter narratives. And so reason why we talk about racism, prejudice plus power, because power is key. Who's controlling the narrative? So who decides whose image is going to be blasted and who's going to be criminalized, right? And so even at a young age, we begin to form our beliefs by stories, the stories we hear, the shows we watch. And based on those shows we watch, based on the stories we read, based on who's telling the story, whatever bias they may have, they tell it the way they want it to play out, or what they want you to believe. So if people don't look at the history, people may think that when we think of ghetto behavior, or behavior that we think are just like, is just inappropriate, other groups have demonstrated this behavior in American history. It's just this idea of race. So when the Irish came over, when the Italians came over, when people came over and they were placed in pockets and ghettos, they were violent. They did all the different things that we may see happen in Black ghettos, so to speak. These things are not new to any particular group of people. The issue is who's telling the story. And so the issue is that race has been so stigmatized that if you're darker, it's just like a liability. And so what we're dealing with is that it's, let me go here, right? In the 1800s, whites had to find a way to justify to other whites why racism was okay. Let me use another word. why slavery was okay. Because a good person be like, why are we doing this to somebody? So you got to convince people, you got to get people to buy in that we're going to mistreat people. And so you tell lies, but you don't say it's a lie. You begin to justify they're not really human, you know, they're retarded, they're, you know, there's something, you know, wrong with them and so forth. And so all this stuff is documented, you know, and so this stuff had to be, it just didn't happen overnight. It was gradually baked in and cooked in, like even with the minstrel shows and white people putting in blackface with Jim Crow and all these characters that they would create in books and in newspapers. They use media to project a image upon Black people, and they were experts at convincing the masses that this is what Black people were like. And so Black people forever has been trying to convince other people or the world that this is not who we are, that we are intelligent. They came up with theories. During the 1800s, they came up with theories and taught this in school, that that white people have bigger skulls, they have bigger brains, this whole craniology, that they found ways to systemically ingrain this in people, that we were not fully human, that we were not as intelligent. So all of these things are layers. One of the things I try to tell people, we each have a soul, but I try to explain it this way, but there's something called the collective soul. So when we're talking about being traumatized as African Americans, that you still feel some of the pain that your ancestors went through. So in the same way, if my ancestors may have done certain things in the past, that same arrogance or superiority might come through, and I might feel that, I might be dealing with that. And so the collective soul is battling, I think, right now in America, because there are things that are so deeply rooted that we're fighting against, and we're trying to change people's mindsets and people's perspectives. And so I think the reason why sometimes when you try to have these difficult conversations, people are just not putting it in its proper context, and they're not understanding the full history of why we're here, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It makes total sense. And, you know, I have to say, the other day, I don't know why, but all of a sudden I've gotten into watching old cowboy movies, and kind of weird. And I was shocked because it was an old cowboy movie that obviously was from the early set in the early 1800s. And it was a plantation owner with 3 slaves, and the 2 brothers were approaching their owner asking for freedom to go dig for gold. And the conversation just, it blew my mind, because we're not used to seeing, you know, a conversation like that anymore. And it was shocking, I gotta say, that this used to be the norm, and that it's hard to even imagine that world. But, you know, we think that we've moved beyond slavery, but, you know, truly, like you're saying, those feelings, those layers are still there. And, you know, we think we've moved beyond it, but obviously we haven't.
The conversations are still happening. We're just using different words.
Yeah.
Right. We're using different words, and we're using different tools to be able to get to the outcome that we want to get to. So, you know, they said the game has changed. That's really what has happened, right? It's not that those things are not happening. Black people are still being oppressed, dehumanized, denigrated, and humiliated in workplaces, and are being discriminated against, and, you know, being impacted by racism. So we've just learned to do it a different way.
Yeah. So how do we move forward? So we're on the back end of our event here. Oh, good. Make sure if you have comments or questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. My question is, where do we go from here? I want to give James an opportunity to talk about cultural humility, because I had not heard about cultural humility. I've only heard cultural sensitivity, cultural relevance, this concept of cultural humility, and I've heard you speak twice, and it really just provides a greater insight into how we move forward. And I know that you both have great insight about how we disrupt bias and move forward. And so I would like to hear from you, James, about how we move forward and your concept of cultural humility.
Yeah, one of the things I've been I've been on this big gospel of humility kick, so to speak, right? I just believe that humility is the way to go. Like, humility is really about not making assumptions. And it's about, one of the ways I like to describe it is me creating room in my heart for other people to be able to have these courageous conversations so that I can learn. With cultural humility is understanding that culture is unique to the person. For so long, we generalize culture. So if I look at you and I see how you're built, I look at the color of your skin, then I might make a broad assumption that this is the culture that is most important to you, and you must be a part of this culture. And I know things about the Black culture, I know things about Latino culture and so forth. But we begin to understand that culture is so complex and that it's a moving target, and that one group of people is not a monolith. You just can't broad stroke Black people and think all Black people like this, or that they like jazz, or they like hip hop, because we see that there are Black people who don't like any of those things. It's very complicated. And so cultural humility is really saying, all right, culture is unique and it is individualized. And so I need to take the time to get to know Kelly. Yes, I see she's an African American female, she's articulate and so forth, but she may not like the same music I like because we got the same color skin. And so the more that people can move away from prejudice, stereotypical thinking, where they're broad stroking people based on what they look like and they're judging a book by its cover, and they begin to humble themselves. And humility is also the whole idea that I'm going to put others above myself. And it's okay if people are different. It's okay if people have a different perspective or they have a different preference. It doesn't make them less than, it doesn't make me better. And so oftentimes in America, we think America is the greatest place to live on earth. We think that our school is the best school. We that's baked into us. And so Culture Millie is saying, I'm going to be able to slow down. And so one of the things Kelly talked about earlier in this program about snap judgments, understanding that there are these brain rules where your brain can do these things so quick. So Coach Millie is saying, let me slow down a little bit. Let me begin to have conversation, and let me begin to develop partnerships. Let me intentionally begin to put myself in situations where I can be uncomfortable so that I can learn about others. And so if we live in a bubble, and Facebook is going to contribute to that bubble, there are algorithms that's going to put things in place that's going to give me more of what I like. And so I'm not being challenged in the way I think and my beliefs. And so Coach Familiar is really about understanding that it's really about developing partnerships. It's about learning from each other. It's understanding that I'm not better than you because I look this way and so forth. So I think Culture Mill is a way to dismantle a lot of these broken systems that are in place. And I think it is relevant to so many aspects of life. And I think it's much deeper than the black and white binary, because we have classism, we have sexism, we have all different isms. And so when we begin to embrace a humble heart, then we really can begin to learn what's really most important to other people.
Do you want me to answer, Cal?
Yes, please.
So I think the other thing too, everything that James says, yes. And I think the other thing is that we have to, even before having these conversations, we have to be honestly willing to be uncomfortable. right?
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that we say we want to have these conversations, but then we want to justify, we want to defend, we want to get mad, we want to do all of that. We have to be uncomfortable, because in our discomfort is where learning occurs and change happens. So we have to feel the discomfort and we have to stay there. So when you hear people say, can we just move on? I wish you would stop talking about this. Oh, I'm so glad that's off the news. It's because they're getting so uncomfortable. They want to go back to the comfort of having to not deal with it. And when you're talking about things like racism, what we have to realize is that Black people never get to say, I'm going to put that over here.
Yes.
Right. You know, I'm the mother of a son who was brutalized by the police. So when I see the George Floyds of the world, when I see all of those things, I don't get to put that aside and be like, right? Because that is part of my life, right? That is part of my existence, and worrying about, okay, the next time, right, that he gets pulled over by a police officer for being Black, for driving while Black, walking while Black, having dreadlocks while Black, whatever it is that going to be the day that I get the call about that George Floyd's family got, right? Yeah. And so we have to be very uncomfortable in understanding and hearing the truth, right? And sitting in that discomfort. And then when you're talking about, you know, cultural humility and moving beyond what you see about me, right? So you have to have a conversation with me. So that's why I wrote my book, Conversations Change Things, because I believe that. You have to be able to create safe spaces where people can have conversations. And there are rules to having the conversation. I call it prepare, engage, reflect. Right? The first pillar is you need to prepare for that conversation. And there's all kinds of things to do to prepare. But one of the things is, what is the intention? Why do you want to have this conversation? Right? Because sometimes we want to have the conversation because, oh my God, it's all on the news. I should be saying something. So I'm going to go have that conversation. Well, the problem is that if that's the intention behind it, to just cover or to say that, well, see, I asked a question or I have the conversation, that's going to go badly, right? Because the intention behind it is not good. And if you don't know what the outcome, the intended outcome of the conversation is, likewise, it's going to go off the rails, right? So it's prepare, engage, reflect. You have to know also when I'm having this conversation, so I've decided to have the conversation, what do I do if something happens? What do I do if I make a mistake? What do I do if I say something wrong and somebody calls me out? Do I then get defensive? Do I then try to justify? Do I get mad? Or do I have the humility to accept that I'm being corrected and that I've made a mistake, and then be able to move forward? And once the conversation is over, I need to reflect on that conversation so that I can have more of them, so that I can teach others, and so that I don't create collateral damage, right? Based on things that have happened in the conversation, because you may learn some stuff about yourself, right? that you don't like or you don't know. And somebody may have told you something about yourself. And so you have to then be gracious enough and courageous enough to accept that those things may have been said to you, if you've learned something. And how do you then move forward in doing that? But you have to be willing to do that. You have to be concerned about the impact of your words and your behaviors and stereotypes and all of those things. You have to be concerned about that impact, be willing to make a change and then change.
Absolutely. That's great. We have
Kelly, if I could ask a quick question, you know, because one of the things that's very important to me is nationwide, 21% of Blacks live in poverty. And graduation rates, especially among Black males, is very low. What can we do as educators in the classroom, and what can we do as business people to really be more diverse and to put some of those stereotypes aside? Say I get a resume and I have a, you know, we had this conversation last time, we had Harriet, or we have, you know, Monique. You know, as an employer, we can instinctively stereotype somebody just by a name. How do we move beyond those types of things? How do we get more diverse in the classroom and the business world?
Well, two things. So we're talking about educators and we're talking about business people. I'm going to separate them for a second. So educators are educated, hopefully, right? And so we should know better, right? So there shouldn't be this hurdle for educators to get past it. However, educators are also people, right? And we come to our classrooms with what we've heard, read, seen, and experienced. What you have to do is do self-reflection. When you're talking about unconscious bias, because it is outside of our awareness, in order for you to figure out what your biases are, you have to reflect. So one of the things that teachers can do is look at the children in their classroom. Look at how you're treating them. If